Hello, and welcome once again to this week's sermon. This sermon is for the 5th of November 2023. That will be the 31st in Ordinary Time, Year A. The first reading is Micah chapter 3, verses 5 to 12. The second reading is one I've chosen for myself rather than following the lectionary, and I've chosen 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 18. And then back to the lectionary again for our gospel reading, Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 to 12. Micah, along with his contemporary Isaiah of Jerusalem, lived in worrying times. They both saw the dark clouds of political storms gathering in the north that might break any moment and destroy their small state of Judah and their larger northern Jewish neighbour, Israel. From the perspective of a Jewish prophet, Micah interprets the problem not just as a military or political one, but also, and chiefly, as a religious and moral one. Assyria may have been a brutal, militaristic state threatening southern expansion towards Israel and Judah, but for Micah, the root cause is the religious and moral decline of the Jewish people. Assyria just happens to be God's chosen instrument of punishment, according to him. Micah accuses Israel and Judah of building their societies on murder and injustice. Those who have food to eat call for peace and put down those that are rebelling because they are starving. Such injustice will result in Jerusalem becoming a ploughed field, destroyed beyond repair. It is a warning many nations should heed. This is how the Bible is so powerful. It speaks across the ages and cultures into our lives today in so many different and penetrating ways. Recent decades of globalization conducted by an oligarchy of the super wealthy, of politicians in the pockets of a corporate and banking elite, have enriched the top few percent of the world at the cost of the majority, many of whom have seen wages stagnate, jobs shipped to one cheap labour source to the next, and whose small lives have been patronised and ignored for too long. The prospects for younger generations are worrying on many fronts. Unemployment among the young is always higher than for older workers. Getting a start in life is a real challenge and always has been. The young come out of universities often with qualifications of questionable value, buried under a mountain of student debt, which many will never pay off. Affordable housing is just politicians' rhetoric for many. The young also face the burden of not only their own debt, but the debt of past generations, who wanted more than they were prepared to pay for, and so borrowed money, which the next generations will have to pay off. The Australian government will soon be paying the equivalent of an extra health service in interest on its national debt. The UK government is paying the equivalent of its defence budget and its education budget. The USA is paying the equivalent of its mighty defence budget in interest alone. These debt levels have been run up in a period of history like we have never known. Since World War II, there has been a huge post-war baby boomer generation passed through the system. They were the largest cohort in history of workers, taxpayers and consumers. They had unprecedented amounts of money between them to spend and invest. Now they are retiring out of the economy and spending up their savings and investments one last time. They are falling out of the tax-paying workforce. Their expertise is retiring with them. And because we have measured success by material prosperity, more money has gone into building assets and less money into raising children. So now there is a population bomb about to go off in many countries. Only this week, the newspapers were full of the island with no children, Sardinia, whose population will halve in the next 30 years, along with many other parts of the world. Japan, Korea, Italy, Germany, China, they will all see dramatic declines in population this century. With fewer children being born to overburdened younger generations, the debt burden will only grow per capita in the future. The young will be paying for things we enjoyed, but which they cannot afford for themselves. In many developing countries, endemic corruption steals from the majority. In the West, an ever-widening inequality between the top elite and the general population continues to open up. In 1965, the average CEO earned 40 times what the average worker earned. Today, the CEO earns 400 times what the average worker earns. These should be concerns for both left and right political parties. Such fundamental cracks in society weaken us all and threaten to bring the whole house of cards falling about our ears. Divided, unjust societies are weak and easily fall prey to external aggression. Ask Micah if you've got any doubt about that. When secularists write their history books, they are content to write that the fall of the Roman Empire was partly due to decadence and moral decay, or that despotic left-wing or right-wing regimes were brought down by their internal moral contradictions. Churchgoers are content to hear of Israel or Judah getting their comeuppance for their religious and moral failures. But we are all far less willing to accept the possibility that our own society is in danger due to the moral delinquency of our generation. Micah challenges us to ask ourselves with brutal honesty if ever anything like that could happen to us. Just how secure are the moral foundations which uphold the stability of our society? As the second reading, I have chosen a reading from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 18. And I've chosen it as an example of a Christian group facing a terrifying apocalypse. At least, that is what they believed at the time. The first converts to the new Christian religion at Thessalonica were in fevered turmoil. They worried and hoped at the same time that the resurrection of Jesus meant the end of the world was imminent. They were in a very vulnerable position in those early days of living with a new religion, unsure what the answers were to their many questions, not always sure whose advice to take. Over the generations, society has seen how mentally deranged or capricious religious leaders often exploit such vulnerable and easily persuaded newcomers. I was given a package only last week here at church containing booklets from someone claiming to be the second Messiah. The deranged and the capricious are still out there. St. Paul was not one of them. Paul says, calm down. Just get on and live a normal, quiet life. Do not stir up public panic. Work hard for yourselves and your families. Do not give up work and just wait around for the apocalypse to arrive, as some had done in Thessalonica. In times of national and global crisis, it is not the church's role to fan the flames of uncertainty and panic. Christians benefit as much as everyone else from a stable, peaceful, and orderly society. On the other hand, Paul does not deny the reality of a coming judgment just to maintain a quiet life. At this stage of his ministry, and Thessalonians represents Paul's earliest thinking, Paul himself seems to have assumed the day of judgment was imminent. We see from St. Luke's Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles that Paul and his fellow apostles later develop an understanding that the age of the church must come before any day of judgment, so that the world in its entirety has chance to hear the gospel and respond. Talk of Judgment Day has now largely been left to the lunatic fringe. The whole concept has been undermined by the religious crazies who have denounced all and sundry and gone to the hills in anticipation of the best seats in the house from which they can gleefully watch the rest of humanity get their just deserts. It is not socially acceptable in comfortable Western societies to speak in such atavistic terms, laden as they are with such colourful and fantastic imagery of beasts and devils and fire and sulphur and gnashing of teeth. But in throwing out the old literalist understandings, many have let go of the very idea of judgment altogether. That may be a mistake, especially if God does still care for the oppressed, exploited, tortured, and marginalised. The church's role is not to drop the inconvenient truths of the Bible because they are unpopular, but to find a new language with which to convey them. Many Christians still retain a belief in divine justice and see Judgment Day in the Bible as poetic imagery. Such Christians still believe in judgment on the grounds that they think God does still care about the effects of evil and sin. But they are often frightened of speaking about such things for fear of appearing like the self-righteous Pharisees in our Gospel reading today from Matthew 23, 1-12. Where Jesus saw sheep without a shepherd, therefore in need, the Pharisees saw an opportunity for disdain and self-righteousness. The danger of self-righteousness has haunted religious belief, Christianity included, from Adam and Eve to the present day. It is a constant danger which is responsible for turning many people away from the church. How can we speak of the moral decline of the nation without sounding as if we are puffed up with self-righteous pride? It's very difficult. The Jewish world was bubbling away with discontent in Jesus' day. The people were looking for a new shepherd in those days. Many were searching for a new sense of hope and purpose. Many were eager to run after new religious movements. Some favoured a highly demanding and austere monastic style religion, like the Essenes, or like John the Baptist. Others preferred a highly political religion, like the Zealot Party, which was preparing for armed rebellion against Rome. Others were attracted by a pietistic religion, they could exercise from home, like the Pharisees. There were a lot of vulnerable people being stirred up to voice their discontent. Many were poor, exploited by the rich of their own nation, as well as by the restrictions and financial demands laid upon them by the imperial regulations from Rome. If the people ran to the zealots, as increasingly they did in the first few decades of the Christian era, they were being incited into a futile and bloody rebellion against Rome, which culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and the mass suicide of Masada. If they ran to the Essenes, they were effectively leaving the world behind to live celibate, ascetic, communal lives dedicated to study and prayer, but disengaged from the general cut and thrust of family and society. If they ran to the Pharisees, they would find a very high price of entry there too. Many would be considered unclean and unworthy. Most ordinary people living everyday lives could not hope to keep the minutiae of the law as interpreted by the Pharisees. If you were already a member, you had the comfort of believing you were the only ones truly keeping the law and could feel superior to the majority of society around you. But most people had no hope of finding spiritual comfort among the Pharisees. They would face disdain and condemnation. Only by running to Jesus would poor but repentant sinners find a ready acceptance. Jesus welcomed those rejected by the Pharisees and those unable to face the rigorous demands of the Essenes, and those who could see where the febrile zealot party was leading the nation. Prostitutes, tax collectors, fishermen, shepherds, soldiers, rich and poor alike, all were equally welcomed by Jesus, including even Samaritans and lepers. In one sense, Jesus interpreted religious duty as simply as possible. Love God and love your neighbour. Yet in another sense, these commands are the most profound of all. Only grace makes any of us right with God in the light of the truly absolute demands of love. But everyone who wishes to live according to these precepts is welcome to join Jesus and his band of people, the church. In today's world, which once again is fermenting with unrest, discontent, and anxiously casting an eye on a frightening future, some offer strong government, such as that offered by President Putin or Xi Jinping. Others have joined a Pharisee-type world of hardline, unforgiving, woke views that cancel everyone who dares to disagree. When a world in turmoil, fearing for the future rather than looking forward to the future, starts casting around for a new shepherd, a new leader who will have all the answers, sort out those perceived to be causing the problems, and getting everyone pulling in the same direction again, that becomes very quickly a very dangerous world. Let's face it, the world has gone after some pretty dubious leaders in its time. The church hasn't much of a voice today. Not many are listening. But let us tell the world again of the Good Shepherd, the kind and gentle leader whose burden is light, but whose demand for justice is unshakable. Let us tell the world of a leader who wants the best for everyone and for all things living. Let us tell a troubled world that the one they seek is already in front of their very nose.